On Christmas Eve, a motorcyclist stops to throw out the trash and hears a faint cry coming from inside the bin. Upon opening it, she finds a 3-year-old boy covered in bruises, holding a torn photograph in his small, frozen hands. "My mother said Santa Claus would find me here," he whispers, his lips blue with cold. But when the motorcyclist looks more closely at the photo and sees who is in it, his blood runs cold, and he realizes that the little girl's nightmare is far from over. The biting wind, a cruel invisible hand clawed at Martha's weathered leather jacket, whipping the sparse flakes of snow into a frenzied dance around her. It was the kind of night that screamed of hearths and families, of laughter echoing behind frosted windows. But Martha, a woman forged in the crucible of a formidable, notorious motorcycle club, and hardened by the stark realities of combat, knew no such warmth. Her life had been a solitary vigil on the periphery of the world, a self-imposed exile on the ragged outskirts of this sleepy, snow-dusted town, a place that even the highway seemed to forget. Here, the only company she kept was the ghosts of her past and the roaring engine of her meticulously maintained Harley-Davidson. Decades of regret clung to her like the chill seeping into her bones, a constant nagging ache of lost connections and roads not taken, a phantom limb of a life she'd deliberately amputated. Christmas Eve. The phrase itself tasted like ash in her mouth, a night she usually spent nursing a bottle of cheap whiskey and the gnawing emptiness inside her, the kind that no amount of alcohol could truly dull. She had been rumbling through the back alleys of Cedar Creek, her bike a low growl against the hushed quiet of the evening, the rhythmic thrum a familiar comfort against the silence of her own thoughts. The alleyways, slick with a thin sheen of ice and slush, were a labyrinth of shadows and discarded dreams, a fitting backdrop for her own existence. A flicker of movement by an overflowing dumpster, a grotesque monument to forgotten things, caught her eye. It was barely a twitch, a shadow detaching from deeper shadow, but something, a primal instinct honed by years of living on the edge, compelled her to stop. She cut the engine, the sudden silence deafening after the roar, and the wind's mournful howl filled the void. What she saw made her stomach clench with an unfamiliar twist, a sensation she hadn't felt in years, not since the day she'd buried her own son. It was a small, impossibly thin figure, no older than 7, digging with desperate frozen fingers through the refuse. The boy, clad in a threadbare coat several sizes too big, its hood pulled low, looked up, startled, his eyes wide and dark in the dim, flickering glow of a distant street lamp. He was a creature of the night, a wraith in the urban wilderness, and his vulnerability was a sharp, unexpected jab to Martha's hardened core. Martha's past was a tapestry woven with threads of defiance and regret, each strand a deliberate choice that had led her further from the path most women took. She had chosen the raw freedom and fierce loyalty of the club, the roar of the road, the adrenaline of a life without rules, over the quiet, expected life of family. A decision that had irrevocably severed the ties to her son, Michael. The estrangement had been a gaping wound, one that never truly healed, even after Michael's passing 3 years prior, a loss that had left Martha grappling with a profound, unarticulated grief that festered beneath her stoic exterior. He had been 35, a man she barely knew in his adulthood, a man whose life had ended too soon, leaving behind a son she had never even met. The guilt was a heavy stone in her gut, a constant reminder of the chasm she had created, a canyon of silence and missed opportunities. Even now, tucked away in the inner pocket of her jacket, a secret burden she carried everywhere, lay an unopened Christmas card. From Michael, sent 7 years ago. It was a testament to her fear, a physical embodiment of her reluctance to confront the past, to peel back the layers of hurt and expose the raw vulnerability beneath, where opportunities for reconciliation had withered and died, leaving only the bitter taste of what-ifs. As the small boy shivered, his gaze, unwavering and unnerving, met hers across the desolate alley. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, pierced Martha's hardened exterior, a sensation akin to a live current passing through her. His eyes, they were the same deep, searching brown as Michael's, a mirror of the very ones that stared back at her from old, faded photographs she rarely dared to look at. A cold dread, mingled with a terrifying, exhilarating hope she refused to name, began to unfurl within her, twisting her insides. Could this be him? Could this vulnerable, scavenging child, this ghost in the alley, be the grandson she never knew, the one Michael had left behind? The thought was a painful shard, too sharp, too devastating to acknowledge, and Martha instinctively recoiled from it, her mind scrambling for any other explanation, any other reason for this uncanny resemblance. "What are you doing out here, kid?" Martha's voice was a low rasp, unaccustomed to softness, a gravelly sound that seemed to scrape against the silence. It was a command more than a question, her default mode of interaction with the world. The boy, Ethan, as he later quietly introduced himself, didn't answer directly. His small hand, chapped and red from the cold, reached into his oversized pocket and pulled out a crumpled crayon drawing. He held it out, a fragile offering in the harsh light. It was a child's rendition of a house, crudely drawn stick figures holding hands, a family portrait in crayon. But one figure was lying down, almost hidden beneath the others, with a small, smudged cross above it. His small voice, barely a whisper against the insistent wind, explained, "My grandma Rose. She went to sleep and didn't wake up. 4 days ago. He had been alone with her body, a tiny sentinel in a silent house, the terror of that solitude, a raw, palpable thing, before the fear of strangers, of them. Social services," he implied with a wary, almost defiant glance, had driven him into the unforgiving night. He didn't trust strangers, he said, his gaze flicking to Martha's formidable attire, the heavy boots, the leather vest adorned with club patches, a silent judgment that pricked at her conscience, though she'd long since stopped caring about the world's opinions. The pieces, shards of a shattered past, began to click into place with agonizing precision, each connection a fresh wound. Martha felt her breath catch in her throat, a tightness in her chest. "Your papa," Martha prompted, her voice tight, barely audible, a desperate plea for confirmation she wasn't sure she wanted. "What was his name?" Ethan looked up, his eyes, those same familiar brown eyes that mirrored. Michael's holding hers. His voice, though still quiet, held a new certainty. "Papa Michael Morrison," he said, the name a hammer blow to Martha's chest, echoing through the hollow chambers of her memory. Michael Morrison. Her Michael. The Morrison name, carried by a boy who was undoubtedly his son, her grandson, despite the bitter estrangement. The devastating truth slammed into her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath, leaving her reeling, the ground beneath her suddenly unstable. As if to confirm the impossible, the boy then produced a worn, folded document from another pocket, a birth certificate. Martha's fingers trembled as she took it, the cold paper a shocking contrast to the sudden heat in her eyes. Her gaze scanned the official script, the stark black letters on the faded white paper. Michael Morrison, listed clearly as the father, and then her own name, clear as day, under emergency contact, Martha Morrison. A wave of profound, heart-wrenching realization washed over her, a tsunami of grief and understanding. Michael had kept track. All these years he had kept her tethered to his life, to their life, quietly intending for her to be there for Ethan, should the unthinkable happen. He had never truly let her go, not really. He had held onto a thread of hope, a silent, unwavering faith in her, even when she had offered him none. Ethan, it turned out, carried more than just his father's eyes and name. He had a congenital heart condition, a fragile ticker that beat with the same genetic predisposition that had afflicted Michael. It was another cruel twist, another echo of the past, a shared vulnerability that bound them, but Ethan spoke of it with a quiet resilience that belied his tender years. "Papa said my heart was special," he murmured, looking at Martha with a wisdom that seemed impossible for a child. "He said my grandma was lost but not gone, and that love transcends mistakes." The words, Michael's words, struck Martha with the force of a revelation, a posthumous message of forgiveness and enduring love. Her son, even in his absence, was still teaching her, still guiding her, still offering absolution for the decades of her own foolish pride and fear. Then, tucked within the folds of the birth certificate, Martha found them. Official legal custody documents, painstakingly prepared, and a letter, worn and creased, addressed to her in Michael's familiar handwriting. She opened it with trembling hands, the words blurring through a sudden hot haze in her eyes. tears she hadn't shed in years threatening to spill. It was written shortly before his death, a testament to his enduring love and his unwavering faith in her, a final, desperate plea from beyond the grave. In it, he explicitly named her as Ethan's guardian, a last, desperate act of trust, a profound challenge to her carefully constructed solitude. In it, he explicitly named her as Ethan's guardian, a last, desperate act of trust, a profound challenge to her carefully constructed solitude. The words blurred, not just from the unshed tears that stung her eyes, but from the sheer force of their meaning, each syllable a chisel striking at the hardened shell she had built around her heart. Michael, her son, had seen through her, past the leather and the grit, past the decades of silence and the self-imposed exile. He had seen the mother beneath, the one she herself had long forgotten, the one she had deliberately buried under layers of regret and defiance. His faith, so absolute, so undeserved, felt like a physical weight pressing down on her, a burden heavier than any she had ever carried on her bike, yet infused with a terrifying, fragile beauty. He wrote of his hope, his enduring hope, that she would eventually find her way back to them, to the family she had abandoned, to the love she had denied. Find her way back. The phrase echoed in Martha's mind, a ghostly whisper from a son she had barely known as a man, yet whose understanding of her, even in his final moments, seemed to pierce her very soul. He hadn't condemned her. He had simply waited for her to realize what she had lost, waited for her to remember what truly mattered. The guilt, a familiar companion now sharpened into an agonizing blade twisting in her gut. She had missed his life, missed his struggles, missed the man he had become. And now he was gone, leaving behind this fragile, quiet boy, a living testament to all the years she had squandered, all the love she had withheld. The letter spoke of Ethan's gentle spirit, his special heart, a phrase that now resonated with a heartbreaking double meaning, given the congenital condition. Michael had described Ethan's curiosity, his quiet resilience and his boundless capacity for love, even for a grandmother he'd never met. He had painted a picture of a boy who, despite his own challenges, carried a light that Michael desperately wanted to protect, a light he entrusted to Martha, the one person he believed, against all evidence, would eventually rise to the occasion. The words were a testament to a son's unwavering love, a love that transcended her mistakes, her abandonment, her stubborn refusal to engage. They were a plea, a challenge, and a final profound act of forgiveness. Martha's knuckles, calloused and scarred from years of wrenching and riding, whitened as her grip tightened on the worn paper. The wind still howled its mournful tune, but she no longer felt the cold seeping into her bones, only the searing heat of 1,000 forgotten memories, a lifetime of choices rushing back to confront her. Her mind, usually a fortress of stoic pragmatism, reeled under the onslaught. Solitude had been her armor, her chosen penance. It had allowed her to exist on the fringes, to avoid the messy complications of human connection, to numb the ache of her past. But now, that armor had been shattered, blown apart by a child's quiet voice and a dead man's enduring love. Ethan, oblivious to the storm raging within her, shivered beside her. His small frame trembled, not just from the cold, but from the raw exhaustion of days spent alone, of nights spent in fear, of the crushing weight of a child's grief. He looked up at her, his big brown eyes so achingly familiar, filled with a mixture of apprehension and a nascent, desperate hope. He didn't press, didn't demand, just waited, a silent, fragile question mark in the desolate landscape of Christmas Eve. Martha tore her gaze from the letter. Its words burned into her mind and looked at the boy. This wasn't just a child. This was a piece of Michael, a living, breathing connection to the son she'd lost, a second chance she never believed she deserved. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly overwhelming. Her life, meticulously ordered in its isolation, was about to be irrevocably upended. There was no going back to the solitary vigil, no retreating to the comforting roar of her engine as her only companion. This small, vulnerable boy with his special heart and his quiet wisdom demanded more. He demanded a home, warmth, food, and most frightening of all, he demanded love. The immediate reality of their situation crashed over her. They were in a freezing alley on Christmas Eve, a child with a heart condition, and a woman who hadn't cooked a proper meal in years, let alone nurtured a soul. Her apartment, a Spartan affair above a dusty garage on the edge of town, was hardly a place for a child. It smelled of oil and stale coffee, its few rooms filled with tools and forgotten memories, not toys or laughter. It was a place for a hermit, not a guardian. Yet the alternative, leaving him to the mercy of social services, to them, as Ethan had so warily put it, was unthinkable. Michael had chosen her. He had trusted her. A deep, unfamiliar resolve began to solidify within Martha, pushing past the terror and the guilt. It was a raw, primal instinct, buried for decades, now clawing its way to the surface. She wouldn't fail Michael again. She wouldn't fail Ethan. This wasn't about redemption. Not yet. It was about responsibility, about honor, about a debt she could never truly repay. She carefully folded the birth certificate and Michael's letter, tucking them back into her inner pocket, closer to her own fragile heart. The cold dread that had mingled with hope now settled into a firm, albeit daunting, determination. She knelt, her leather jacket creaking, bringing her face closer to Ethan's. His eyes, wide and searching, met hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Martha saw not just the ghost of Michael, but the spark of a new, uncertain future. "Come on, kid," she rasped, her voice still rough, but with an undertone of something new, something almost gentle. "Let's get you somewhere warm." She reached out a hand, a gesture alien to her, one that felt clumsy and hesitant. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking from her worn-gloved hand to her face, searching for something, perhaps a sign of sincerity. Then slowly, tentatively, his small, freezing fingers curled around hers. His hand was impossibly small, delicate, and cold, a stark contrast to her own calloused grip. Yet the contact sent a jolt of warmth through her, a sensation she hadn't felt in years, a tiny, defiant ember against the biting wind. The roar of her bike, usually a symbol of her fierce independence, now felt different, a powerful engine that would carry not just her, but this small, precious cargo. As she led Ethan towards where her Harley sat idling, a low thrum against the quiet night, Martha felt the first tremor of that terrifying, exhilarating spark of purpose take root. The road ahead was unknown, fraught with the ghosts of her own making and the immense challenges of a life she had never imagined. But for the first time in decades, Martha felt a flicker of something beyond regret, something that hinted at a path forward, a chance to rewrite the ending to a story she thought was already over. The weight of her past remained, a heavy stone, but now a small, warm hand was clasped in hers, guiding her into a future she had no choice but to embrace. The biting wind still clawed, but its icy grip felt strangely distant now, overshadowed by the fragile warmth radiating from the small hand nestled in Martha's calloused one. Ethan's fingers, so delicate, so impossibly cold, seemed to anchor her, pulling her away from the desolate echoes of her past and into a present that demanded everything. Every step towards her idling Harley was a deliberate act, a conscious choice to step onto a path she had meticulously avoided for decades. The low thrum of the engine, usually a solitary symphony, now felt like a heartbeat, a rhythm for two. She paused beside the bike, its chrome gleaming dully under the distant street lamp, a powerful beast of metal and leather that had always been an extension of her own untamed spirit. Now it felt too big, too loud, too dangerous for the small, shivering boy beside her. A wave of inadequacy, sharp and unwelcome, washed over her. How was she supposed to get a child, a fragile child with a special heart, onto this machine? Her instincts screamed for caution, for protection, for a softness she hadn't known how to offer in a lifetime. "All right, kid," she rasped, her voice still rough, but with an edge of something akin to pleading. "This ain't exactly a minivan. Gotta climb up?" Ethan looked up at the towering machine, his eyes wide, a flicker of apprehension mixed with a child's awe. He didn't complain, didn't hesitate, just nodded, a silent testament to his quiet resilience. Martha knelt, her joints protesting, and carefully, awkwardly, helped him hoist himself onto the passenger seat, his thin frame dwarfed by the wide, padded leather. She had to adjust the foot pegs, a simple task that felt monumental, making sure his small boots could find purchase. His threadbare coat, still several sizes too big, flapped in the wind as she secured the helmet, a spare she kept for the rare occasion of a passenger, fastening the strap under his chin with a trembling hand. The helmet, too, was too large, obscuring half his face, making him look even smaller, more vulnerable. The simple act of ensuring his safety was a torrent of unfamiliar emotions. She had always ridden alone, the wind her only companion, the open road her only destination. Now, every bump, every turn, every gust of wind felt amplified, a potential threat to the precious cargo behind her. She swung her leg over, settling into the saddle, the familiar weight of the bike, a grounding presence. She felt Ethan's small hands tentatively grasp her jacket, a light, uncertain touch that sent another jolt through her. It wasn't a firm grip, not yet, but it was there, a silent promise of trust. The ride through the snow-dusted streets of Havenwood was a slow, deliberate crawl. Martha usually tore through the town, a blur of leather and chrome, but tonight she was acutely aware of every ripple in the asphalt, every icy patch. The cold, once a familiar adversary, now felt like a personal enemy, seeking to penetrate Ethan's fragile defenses. She could feel his small body shivering behind her, despite the thick layers of her jacket offering some meager shield. Her mind raced, a chaotic storm of anxieties and practicalities. Food, warmth, a proper bed, medicine, a doctor, 1,000. Things she hadn't considered in decades of solitary living. Her apartment, a sparse two-room affair above a mechanic's garage on the edge of town, was hardly a sanctuary. It was a place designed for a ghost, not a child. The air inside would be stale, thick with the scent of oil and forgotten cigarettes, the single space heater struggling against the winter chill. There were no toys, no soft blankets, no comforting smells of home-cooked meals, just the stark reality of her existence, laid bare, for a child who had already seen too much of the world's harshness. The thought filled her with a profound shame, a deep-seated regret for the life she had chosen, a life that now felt utterly inadequate. As they finally pulled into the gravel lot beside her garage, the Harley's engine settling into a quiet purr before she cut it, the silence that followed was immense, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. Martha dismounted, her movements stiff, and carefully helped Ethan off the bike. His legs seemed wobbly, his small body a picture of exhaustion. He still hadn't spoken much, his quietness a stark contrast to the storm raging within Martha. She realized he hadn't eaten, hadn't had a proper meal in days. The thought twisted her gut. "All right, kid," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "This is it. Ain't much, but it's warm." She led him up the creaking wooden stairs, the worn steps groaning under their combined weight. The door opened into a dim, uninviting space. The single overhead bulb cast a harsh yellowish glow on the utilitarian furniture, a worn leather armchair, a scarred wooden table, a small cot in the corner that served as her bed. Tools lay scattered on a workbench, a half-empty mug of stale coffee sat on the table, and the air hung heavy with the smells of grease and old dust. It was everything she had feared, a stark, unchildlike environment. Ethan's eyes, still wide and watchful, scanned the room, his expression unreadable. He didn't flinch, didn't comment, just stood there, a small still point in the chaotic swirl of Martha's emotions. His quiet acceptance was more unsettling than any complaint. It spoke of a child too accustomed to disappointment, too familiar with making do. "Sit down." Martha gestured vaguely towards the armchair, the only soft surface in the room. "I'll see what I can find for you to eat." She moved awkwardly towards the small, ancient kitchenette, her mind racing. What did a kid eat? She had a can of chili, some instant coffee, a few stale crackers. Her pantry was a testament to her solitary, uninspired existence. The shame intensified, burning a hot path through her veins. Michael had entrusted this precious child to her, and she couldn't even offer him a decent meal. She rummaged through the sparse cupboards, her hands fumbling, her mind a whirlwind of self-recrimination. Finally she found a box of instant oatmeal, a relic from some long-forgotten attempt at healthier eating. It wasn't much, but it was warm and hopefully palatable. As she boiled water in a dented pot, the rhythmic bubbling a small comfort in the vast silence, she glanced back at Ethan. He was still sitting in the armchair, small and still, watching her with those unnervingly familiar eyes. He hadn't taken off his coat. "You can take off your coat, kid," she offered, trying to inject some warmth into her tone. It's warmer in here than out there. Ethan slowly, carefully, began to shed the oversized garment. Underneath, he wore a thin, faded, long-sleeved shirt, clearly insufficient for the brutal winter night. His small frame looked even more fragile without the bulk of the coat. Martha's heart ached with a pain she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. She brought him a steaming bowl of oatmeal, a spoon, and a glass of water. "It's not much," she mumbled, pushing the bowl towards him, "but it's hot." He took the bowl with both hands, his fingers still numb with cold, and began to eat slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every spoonful. He didn't devour it, didn't show the ravenous hunger she might have expected from a child who had been scavenging. Instead, he ate with a quiet dignity, a silent appreciation that spoke volumes. It reminded her again of Michael, of his quiet strength, his unyielding resilience. As he ate, Martha felt a fresh wave of panic. His heart condition. She had forgotten to ask about medication, about his doctor, about the specific needs of his special heart. She knew nothing, absolutely nothing about caring for a child, let alone a sick one. The weight of Michael's trust, once a beacon of purpose, now felt like an unbearable burden, threatening to crush her. "Ethan," she started, her voice a little shaky, "your heart. Do you have medicine you need to take?" He looked up, a small frown creasing his brow. "My pills," he whispered. "Grandma Rose kept them safe. She wrote it all down, but I don't have them anymore." His gaze fell, a shadow passing, over his small face. They're back at the house. The house. The house where his grandmother lay, silent and still. The house he had fled in fear. Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. She couldn't go back there, not tonight. The thought of confronting that scene, of facing the reality of Rose's death, was too much. And what about the authorities? Them, as Ethan had said. They would be looking for him. She had to act fast, to figure out a plan, to protect him. "Okay," she said, trying to project a calmness she didn't feel. "We'll figure it out tomorrow. Tonight you just need to rest." She looked around the Spartan room, searching for anything that might offer comfort. Her cot, a narrow, uncomfortable bed, was all she had. It wasn't suitable for a child, especially not one with a heart condition. Her gaze landed on a pile of old, clean motorcycle rags, soft from years of washing, folded neatly on her workbench. Not ideal, but better than nothing. She pulled a worn but clean blanket from her cot, and with the rags, fashioned a makeshift bed on the floor beside the armchair, hoping the proximity to the heater would offer some warmth. "Here," she said, patting the improvised bed. "Here," she said, patting the improvised bed. Ethan moved towards it, his small body a shadow against the dim light cast by the single bare bulb hanging overhead. He didn't question it, didn't complain. He simply lay down, curling into a tight ball, pulling the worn blanket up to his chin. Martha watched him, a knot of unease twisting in her stomach. It was inadequate, she knew. Her apartment, a chaotic jumble of tools, spare parts, and the lingering scent of grease and stale coffee, was no place for a child, least of all a sick one. She felt a surge of shame, hot and unwelcome, at the stark reality of her life laid bare before this vulnerable boy. She retreated to her own cot, a narrow strip of canvas stretched over a metal frame, and lay down, fully clothed, the leather of her jacket creaking with every slight shift. Sleep felt miles away, an impossible luxury. Her mind, usually a quiet, solitary landscape, was now a maelstrom of questions and anxieties. Ethan's small, even breaths were a new, unsettling rhythm in the silence of her home. Every rustle of the blanket, every faint sigh pulled at a thread she hadn't known existed within her. A thread connecting her to a responsibility she had spent a lifetime avoiding. She thought of Michael, of the faded photographs she kept tucked away, images of a boy with bright, curious eyes so like Ethan's. The guilt, a familiar companion, intensified, pressing down on her chest until it felt hard to breathe. Michael had trusted her. He had seen something in her, despite everything, that she herself couldn't recognize. He had named her, Martha Morrison, as an emergency contact, a guardian. It was an act of profound, unwavering faith, a testament to a love that had somehow endured her decades of abandonment. The unopened Christmas card still in her jacket pocket felt like a burning ember now, a tangible symbol of her cowardice, her inability to face the pain of reconciliation. How many chances had she let slip away? How many unspoken words had died with him? Ethan shifted on the floor, a soft whimper escaping his lips. Martha's eyes snapped open in the darkness. She listened, her senses heightened, every muscle tense. Was he cold? Was he in pain? The fear was primal, sharp, unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't the cold, calculated fear of a street fight or the adrenaline-fueled terror of combat. This was a deeper, more insidious fear, rooted in vulnerability and an overwhelming sense of inadequacy. She was utterly unprepared for this. She sat up, slowly, carefully, not wanting to disturb him if he was finally sleeping. The digital clock on her workbench glowed a faint red. 2:17 a.m. Christmas morning. What a grim, solitary dawn this promised to be. She remembered the urgency in Ethan's voice, the mention of his pills. A child with a heart condition, without his medication, alone with a woman who knew nothing about medicine, nothing about children. The magnitude of the situation crashed over her, heavy and suffocating. She had to get those pills. But the house where Rose lay, the image of it, dark and silent, chilled her to the bone. And them, the authorities. If she went back, if she was seen, what then? They would take Ethan. They would ask questions she couldn't answer, questions that would unravel her carefully constructed life of solitude, expose her past, her failures. The thought of losing him, just as she had found him, was a sharp, unexpected pain. It was a selfish thought, she knew, but it was there, raw and undeniable. Martha got up, moving with the quiet stealth of years spent in the shadows. She found an old, worn flannel shirt, one of Michael's, she realized with a jolt, tucked away in a forgotten drawer. It was too big for Ethan, but it was soft, clean, and carried a faint, almost imperceptible scent of faded laundry soap. She draped it gently over his sleeping form, a clumsy gesture of comfort. He stirred but didn't wake. His small hand, delicate and pale, lay outside the blanket, fingers slightly curled. Martha reached out, her calloused fingertip barely brushing his skin. It was warm, a fragile warmth, but warmth nonetheless. She spent the rest of the night in her armchair, a sentinel in the dim light, watching Ethan sleep. The biting wind still rattled the single window pane, but inside a different kind of storm raged within Martha. The silence of her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a vast, echoing chamber, amplifying her every doubt, every regret. She replayed Ethan's words, Michael's words. Love transcends mistakes. Could it truly? Could she, Martha, a woman defined by her mistakes, ever hope to transcend them? As the first hint of grey light began to filter through the grimy window, painting the metal tools with a cold metallic sheen, Ethan stirred again. His eyes fluttered open, blinking slowly, adjusting to the unfamiliar surroundings. He looked at Martha, still seated in the armchair, his gaze clear and direct. "Morning," he whispered, his voice hoarse from sleep. "Morning, kid," Martha replied, her own voice rougher than she intended. She cleared her throat. "Sleep okay?" Ethan nodded, pushing himself up. The flannel shirt slid off him, pooling around. His small waist. He looked around the room, his eyes taking in the details she usually ignored. The grease stains on the floor, the stack of old motorcycle magazines, the tools glinting dully on the workbench. He didn't seem to judge, only observed. "We need to get your pills," Martha stated, cutting straight to the point. The thought had been a relentless drumbeat in her mind all night. "Where exactly is your house?" Ethan hesitated, his small face clouding over. It's not far. Just a few blocks from where you found me. On Elm Street, number 14. He looked at her, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "Are they going to be there?" Martha felt a fresh wave of anxiety. They was the problem. She couldn't risk it. Not yet. She needed to be smart, to be quick. "Maybe," she admitted, hedging. "We need to be careful. We go in, get your medicine, and get out. Fast." She knew it was a gamble, a big one, but the alternative, leaving a sick child without his vital medication, was unthinkable. The protective instinct, raw and fierce, was taking root, pushing aside years of ingrained caution and self-preservation. It was a terrifying sensation, this vulnerability, this willingness to risk her own carefully guarded existence for another. She pulled on her heavy leather jacket, its familiar weight a small comfort. "Stay here," she instructed Ethan, her voice firm. "Don't open the door for anyone, understand?" He nodded, his eyes wide. He seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation, the unspoken dangers lurking outside. Martha grabbed her keys, her old .38 revolver, a relic of her club days, tucked securely in her waistband, a habit she couldn't shake. She knew she shouldn't carry it, not anymore, but it was a comfort, a symbol of control in a world that suddenly felt utterly out of control. She hesitated at the door, glancing back at Ethan. He was sitting on the makeshift bed, watching her, his small figure radiating a quiet trust that both humbled and terrified her. "I'll be back," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Soon as I can." Then she was out, stepping into the biting cold of Christmas morning. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine, untouched blanket over the sleepy town. The air was crisp, sharp, cutting through her lungs. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of her boots on the fresh powder. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat, every distant sound a potential alarm. Her senses were on high alert, honed by years of living on the edge. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Ethan. She walked quickly, her gaze sweeping the empty streets, searching for any sign of movement, any vehicle that seemed out of place. The town was still asleep, cocooned in its Christmas Eve slumber. Good. That bought her time. She moved like a phantom, a ghost from a forgotten past, her leather jacket a dark silhouette against the pale dawn. Elm Street, number 14. The address resonated in her mind, a new waypoint on her unexpected journey. As she approached, a small, unassuming house came into view, its windows dark and lifeless. A wreath, slightly askew, hung on the front door, a poignant reminder of the festive season, now imbued with a chilling sense of irony. No lights, no sounds, just the oppressive silence of an empty, sorrowful home. She approached cautiously, her hand instinctively going to the revolver. The front door was unlocked, a small mercy or a chilling oversight. She pushed. It opened slowly, a faint creak echoing in the stillness. The air inside was cold, stagnant, carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of something old, something gone. It was a smell that clawed at her throat, tightening her chest. The house was small, tidy, but clearly lived in by someone who had been struggling. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle lay on a coffee table in the living room. A cheap plastic Christmas tree stood in a corner, unlit. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic thump of her own heart. She moved through the house with a grim determination, her eyes scanning for any sign of them or anything else amiss. The kitchen was clean, a few dishes in the sink. The refrigerator hummed faintly. Martha moved deeper into the house, her boots silent on the worn linoleum of the kitchen. The air here was heavy, thick with the ghost of meals cooked and shared, now just a lingering whisper of domesticity. Her gaze swept over the modest countertops, the chipped ceramic mugs. Hanging from a small rack, the faded magnets clinging to the refrigerator door. Each item was a tiny testament to a life lived, a life now abruptly ended. She wasn't looking for memories, not really, but they assaulted her anyway, fragments of a normalcy she had deliberately forsaken. This was what Michael had built, or tried to build, a quiet home for his son, far from the roar and grit of her world. A pang, sharp and unexpected, twisted in her gut. She checked the cabinets, her movements, precise, practiced from years of searching through unfamiliar spaces. No pills in the kitchen. She wasn't surprised. Medication for a heart condition wouldn't likely be kept next to the cereal. The scent of stale air, of a house left too long without its occupants, began to cling to her, an uncomfortable shroud. She pushed through a swinging door, finding herself in a small dining area, a round table with 2 chairs pulled close, as if a meal had just been finished. A worn placemat with a cartoon character was still on one side, a child's forgotten napkin beside it. Rose's chair presumably sat opposite. Martha could almost picture them there, a quiet grandmother and her grandson, sharing stories over dinner. The image was a stark contrast to her own solitary meals, her own empty table. Her hand still rested on the cold steel of her revolver, a subconscious anchor. The silence of the house was not peaceful. It was a hungry, waiting silence, amplifying every creak of the old. floorboards every beat of her own wary heart. She moved towards what appeared to be a hallway, her eyes darting to closed doors. There were three: a bathroom, she surmised, and two bedrooms. The first door she pushed open revealed a small, neat bathroom. A child's toothbrush sat in a holder next to an adult one, a small stool placed by the sink. No medicine cabinet, just a shallow shelf with toothpaste and a bar of soap. She closed the door gently. The second door opened into a bedroom, clearly Ethan's. The walls were painted a pale blue, adorned with taped-up drawings, crude depictions of spaceships and dinosaurs, a family of stick figures, one with a small smudged cross above it, just like the drawing Ethan had shown her. A small twin bed was neatly made, a faded quilt pulled tight. A few well-loved stuffed animals were arranged on the pillow, silent sentinels. A small bookshelf held a stack of children's books, their spines worn from countless readings. On a tiny bedside table, a nightlight in the shape of a crescent moon glowed faintly, powered by a battery, a small beacon in the gloom. Martha's gaze softened, a rare, almost painful sensation. This was a child's sanctuary, a place of innocent dreams and quiet comfort. It was a stark reminder of the fragile life she was now responsible for. She didn't expect to find the pills here. They were likely kept with Rose, for safekeeping, for dispensing. But a small framed photograph on the bedside table caught her eye. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the smooth glass. It was Michael, younger perhaps in his late 20s, his smile open and genuine, an arm around a woman Martha didn't recognize, a kind-faced woman with soft eyes, and between them, a tiny Ethan, no more than a toddler, clutching a bright red ball. A fresh wave of grief, sharp and raw, washed over her. This was Michael, the son she had lost, the man she barely knew. He had found happiness, a family, a life she had no part in. The photograph was a testament to his resilience, his ability to build a world despite her absence. And then the crushing guilt returned, heavy and suffocating. She had missed all of this, all of Michael's joy, all of Ethan's early years. The chasm she had created seemed wider, deeper than ever before. She carefully placed the photo back, her hand lingering for a moment, an unspoken apology. She turned to the third door, her heart thrumming with a renewed sense of urgency. This had to be Rose's room. She pushed the door open slowly, revealing a space that felt immediately heavier, laden with the weight of recent loss. The air was colder here somehow, and the scent of stagnant air was stronger, tinged with a faint, cloying sweetness that made her stomach churn. The bed was unmade, blankets tangled, a pillow still bearing the faint indentation of a head. A half-empty glass of water sat on the nightstand, next to a well-worn Bible and a pair of reading glasses. It was as if Rose had simply laid down and not woken up. Martha forced herself to breathe, to push back the rising nausea. This was a death scene, albeit a quiet, peaceful one. But it was still a death, and she was standing in the very room where it had happened. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She was an intruder here, a ghost in a house of ghosts. Her eyes scanned the room, methodical, searching. A dresser, a small closet, a vanity. She opened the top drawer of the nightstand first. Inside, a jumble of everyday items, tissues, a tube of hand cream, a small tarnished silver locket. No pills. She moved to the dresser, pulling open each drawer with a soft click. Clothes, neatly folded, smelling faintly of lavender. Undergarments, more clothes. Nothing. The urgency intensified, a frantic drum beat against her ribs. Ethan needed these pills. Soon. She couldn't fail him. Not now. Not after everything. The protective instinct, once a flicker, was now a roaring fire, consuming her carefully constructed walls of detachment. She was no longer just Martha, the solitary biker, the woman hardened by loss. She was a guardian, a protector, driven by a primal need to keep this fragile life safe. She checked the closet, a small space filled with sensible dresses and blouses. A pair of worn slippers sat on the floor. The air in here was even heavier, pressing in on her. She felt a sudden, irrational urge to flee, to get out of this house, away from the oppressive silence, away from the specter of death. But she couldn't. Ethan was waiting. Her gaze fell on a small, locked wooden box on the top shelf of the closet. It was old, intricately carved, clearly a keepsake. Rose's valuables, perhaps. Or could it be? She reached for it, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth wood. It was locked. Of course. She didn't have a key. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that might open it. A hidden key. A loose floorboard. A small, intricately embroidered pincushion sat on the vanity. Martha picked it up, her fingers brushing against the soft fabric. Beneath it, almost hidden, was a tiny, ornate silver key. It was delicate, clearly meant for something small and precious. Hope flared, a hot, bright spark in the cold room. She took the key to the wooden box, her hands trembling slightly as she inserted it into the lock. It clicked open with a soft, almost reverent sound. She lifted the lid, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of precious mementos, a lock of baby hair tied with a tiny blue ribbon, a faded photograph of a young Michael, perhaps 5 or 6, missing a front tooth, beaming at the camera. Another photograph, this one of Rose and Michael, both looking older but still smiling, their arms linked. And then, at the very bottom, beneath the photographs, a small amber-colored prescription bottle. Martha snatched it up, her eyes scanning the label. Ethan Morrison, digoxin. Take 1 tablet daily. Her heart leaped with a mixture of profound relief and overwhelming sorrow. She had found them, but the context, the way they were hidden, nestled among such cherished memories, spoke volumes. Rose had guarded these pills, these symbols of Ethan's fragile life, with the same fierce love she had guarded her memories of Michael. A wave of emotion, raw and powerful, washed over Martha. It wasn't just the relief of finding the medication. It was the realization of the depth of love that had filled this house, a love she had deliberately shut herself off from. Michael, Rose, Ethan, a family, bound by an invisible thread of affection, a thread that Martha had unknowingly, perhaps even unwillingly, become a part of. Her gaze fell back to the photographs in the box. Michael's face, so young, so full of life, stared back at her. The guilt, always present, now intensified, twisting into a physical ache. She had been so consumed by her own choices, her own anger, her own perceived freedom, that she had sacrificed this warmth, this connection, this quiet, enduring love. She closed the wooden box, carefully replacing the key. The pills were in her hand, a tangible link to Ethan's survival, a heavy responsibility. But as she stood there, the scent of Rose's room still clinging to her, she felt something else too, a fragile sense of belonging. She was no longer just an outsider, rummaging through the remnants of a stranger's life. This was her family. This was Michael's legacy. And she, Martha, the hardened biker, the self-imposed exile, was now inextricably bound to it. The silence of the house pressed in again, but it felt different now. The silence of the house pressed in again, but it felt different now. No longer an empty void, but a hushed chamber echoing with the whispers of lives lived, loves cherished, and a quiet, profound resilience. Martha stood there, the small amber bottle a heavy anchor in her palm, its contents a fragile promise of life for Ethan. The scent of lavender, faint yet persistent, seemed to cling to her, a gentle, unseen hand on her shoulder, a reminder of Rose's presence, her meticulous care, her unwavering devotion. It was a scent that spoke of a home of warmth, of a gentle defiance against the cold realities of the world, a defiance Martha had never allowed herself to fully embrace. Her gaze lingered on the closed wooden box, its intricate carvings now imbued with a sacred significance. Within its depths lay not just photographs and mementos, but the very essence of a family's heart, a heart that had beaten steadily, quietly, while Martha had raged against her own. The image of young Michael, toothless and beaming, seared itself into her mind, a stark contrast to the hardened, world-weary face she saw in the mirror. She remembered that smile, fleetingly, from a time before the bitterness, before the club, before the chasm she had carved between herself and her son had become an impassable canyon. The guilt, a familiar, unwelcome companion now intensified, twisting itself into a knot beneath her ribs, a physical manifestation of decades of regret. She traced the contours of the bottle with a calloused thumb, the cool glass a stark counterpoint to the heat rising within her. Digoxin, a word that now carried the weight of a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting Ethan to a future he deserved. Rose had hidden them well, not out of neglect, but out of a fierce, protective love, a love that understood the preciousness of each heartbeat, the vulnerability of a child's fragile existence. It was the love of a grandmother, a love Martha had witnessed, perhaps even envied from a distance, but had never allowed herself to embody. The irony was a bitter taste on her tongue. She, Martha, who had prided herself on her independence, her self-sufficiency, was now holding the very key to a child's survival, a key provided by the love of a woman she had never known, a woman who had quietly, steadfastly kept her family whole. A tremor ran through her, not of cold, but of a profound, unsettling shift deep within her core. The walls she had meticulously built around her heart, brick by painful brick, were crumbling, eroded by the persistent tide of emotion. This wasn't just about finding pills anymore. This was about confronting a legacy, about acknowledging the devastating impact of her choices, about stepping into a role she had spent a lifetime running from. Michael's letter, still tucked away in her jacket pocket, had laid bare his hope, his unwavering faith that she would find her way back. And here, in Rose's quiet, lavender-scented room, surrounded by the echoes of a love she had forsaken, Martha felt the first hesitant stirrings of that return. She looked around the room once more, taking in the simple, comforting details. The patterned wallpaper, slightly faded, the sturdy antique dresser, the neatly made bed, still, bearing the faint indentation of Rose's last rest. Each object seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a testament to a life lived with purpose and affection. This was not the chaotic, transient existence she had known, the rough-and-tumble world of the club, where loyalty was fierce but often fleeting, and intimacy was a luxury rarely afforded. This was rooted. This was stable. This was home, in a way Martha had never truly experienced. The weight of the pills in her hand felt impossibly heavy, tangible manifestation of the responsibility that now settled upon her shoulders. It was a burden, yes, but also a strange, terrifying liberation. For decades, her life had been defined by what she had lost, by what she had run from. Now, for the first time, it felt defined by what she could save, by what she could reclaim. Ethan, her grandson, a living, breathing link to Michael, a second chance at a connection she had so carelessly severed. Martha slowly turned, the floorboards creaking softly. Beneath her boots, a small protest against the sudden disruption of the room's long silence. She clutched the pill bottle tightly, her knuckles white. She had to get back to him. The urgency, momentarily overshadowed by the emotional deluge, now resurfaced, sharp and insistent. His fragile heart, Michael's heart, depended on her. As she moved towards the bedroom door, she glanced at the small vanity table again. The embroidered pincushion, the one that had concealed the key, seemed to wink at her, a silent accomplice in her discovery. She paused, a thought stirring in her mind. Rose's house, this repository of love and memory, held more than just medication. It held clues. It held stories. Stories that Martha, in her self-imposed exile, had deliberately ignored. She couldn't unravel them all now, not with Ethan waiting, but the seed of curiosity had been planted, a tiny sprout in the hardened soil of her soul. Stepping out of Rose's room, Martha pulled the door gently shut, leaving the quiet sanctuary behind. The hallway felt colder, the air thinner, but Martha barely registered it. Her focus was singular, her resolve hardening with each step. She moved with a newfound purpose, a determined stride that carried her past the other closed doors, past the silent living room, towards the kitchen, towards Ethan. He was still huddled in the old armchair, a small, forlorn bundle in the vastness of the kitchen. His eyes, those deep, searching brown eyes, so like Michael's, flickered, open as she approached, a question, an unspoken plea in their depths. The uncertainty that had clouded his face earlier was still there, a thin veil of fear. Martha knelt before him, lowering herself slowly, her knees protesting slightly at the unaccustomed movement. She held out the amber bottle, her hand steady despite the tremor still coursing through her. "I found them, Ethan," she said, her voice a low rasp, still unaccustomed to softness, but now imbued with an undeniable warmth, a fierce protectiveness. Your Grandma Rose kept them safe, just like she kept you safe. Ethan's gaze dropped to the bottle, then lifted back to Martha's face, a flicker of understanding, of relief, passing through his eyes. He didn't speak, but a tiny, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips, a release of tension Martha hadn't realized he was holding. He reached out a small, hesitant hand, his fingers brushing against the cool glass. "We'll get you some water," Martha continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "Then you can take one of these, it'll help your heart." The words felt foreign on her tongue, the language of care, of nurturing, a vocabulary she had long forgotten, or perhaps never truly learned. Yet they felt right, echoing with a truth she was only just beginning to grasp. She rose, her movements deliberate, and went to the sink, filling a glass with tap water. The mundane act felt monumental, each drop a testament to a future she was now committed to building, brick by painful, hopeful brick. As she brought the glass back to Ethan, she saw him watching her, his small face still etched with the lingering shadows of fear and loss, but now undeniably touched with a nascent spark of trust. The pills, the water, the quiet act of care. It was a ritual of healing, a silent promise exchanged between a hardened woman and a fragile child. Martha helped him take the tiny tablet, her large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as they guided the glass to his lips. He swallowed a small gulp, his eyes never leaving hers. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of Rose's kitchen, with the biting wind still howling outside, Martha felt the full, terrifying weight of her new purpose. It was a purpose born of regret, forged in sorrow, but now infused with a fragile, terrifying hope. The road ahead was still unknown, still fraught with the ghosts of her past, but she was no longer alone on it. She had Ethan, and she had a future, however daunting, to fight for. The silence of the house no longer felt like a void, but a canvas, waiting for the colors of a life she was just beginning to paint. The small tablet, a vibrant amber against the stark white of Martha's palm, disappeared with a gulp, carried down by the water she had drawn from Rose's sink. Ethan, his small throat working, watched her, his eyes, still so much like Michael's, holding a fragile mix of exhaustion and a burgeoning, tentative trust. The silence that followed was not empty, but thick with unspoken burdens, with the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant, ceaseless moan of the wind outside. Martha remained kneeling, the chill from the linoleum seeping into her jeans, but she barely felt it. All sensation seemed to converge on the small boy before her, on the delicate pulse she imagined fluttering beneath his thin skin. She reached out, her hand, scarred and calloused from years of gripping handlebars and wrenching tools, hovered for a moment, then settled gently on his shoulder. It was an unfamiliar gesture, one she hadn't offered in decades, perhaps never to a child. The fabric of his oversized coat felt thin beneath her fingers, a stark reminder of his vulnerability, his desperate circumstances. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned ever so slightly into her touch, a movement so subtle it might have been imagined, yet it resonated through Martha's entire being like a deep, resonant chord, a tremor, not of cold, but of something profound and unsettling ran through her. "You'll be all right now, kid," she rasped, the words feeling clumsy, inadequate, yet infused with a sincerity that surprised even herself. She wanted to say more, to offer reassurances she wasn't sure she could deliver, to promise a future she couldn't yet see, but the words caught in her throat. Her life had been one of stark action, not tender pronouncements. Ethan simply nodded, his eyelids beginning to droop. The medication, or perhaps simply the sheer exhaustion of days spent alone, was taking its toll. Martha watched him, a knot of fierce protectiveness tightening in her chest. This boy, her grandson, a living, breathing testament to Michael's enduring love and her own profound failure, was now her responsibility. The weight of it was immense, a crushing burden that threatened to suffocate her, yet within that weight, a strange, resilient strength began to stir. She rose slowly, her joints aching, and gently lifted Ethan from the armchair. He was feather light in her arms, a small bundle of bones and threadbare cloth. The scent of him, faint and a little dusty, was foreign, yet oddly comforting. She carried him through the quiet house, past the closed doors of rooms she hadn't yet explored, past the living room where ghosts of a different family seemed to linger. Her mind, usually a chaotic storm of memories and anxieties, was now singularly focused on the small, fragile life cradled against her. She found a small, neatly made bed in what must have been Ethan's room, a simple space with a worn wooden dresser and a single window looking out onto the snow-dusted backyard. The quilt on the bed was faded but clean, a testament to Rose's care. Martha laid him down gently, pulling the quilt up to his chin. His eyes were already closed, his breathing shallow and even. She knelt beside the bed, watching him sleep, the rise and fall of his chest a silent rhythm against the overwhelming quiet. Outside, the snow continued to fall, a soft, relentless blanket muffling the world. Inside, Martha sat, her gaze fixed on Ethan, her mind a whirlwind of past and present. Michael's letter, still tucked away, had spoken of hope, of finding her way back. But back to what? To a life she had actively rejected, to a family she had abandoned. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She, Martha Morrison, the renegade biker, the lone wolf, was now tethered to a child, to a home, to a future she had never once considered. The flickering street lamp outside cast long, dancing shadows across the room. She thought of her own childhood, a blur of neglect and longing, and how she had sought solace and identity in the roar of an engine and the camaraderie of the club. That life, her life, was a million miles away from this quiet domestic scene. Could she truly shed the skin of the woman she had been for decades? Could she learn to be a grandmother? The word felt foreign, clunky on her mental tongue. She was a fighter, a survivor, not a nurturer. Yet looking at Ethan, so small, so innocent, a fierce, primal instinct she hadn't known she possessed began to assert itself. She spent the rest of the night in an old armchair in the living room, a sentinel against the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and groans of Rose's house. Each sound was a new sensation, a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of her solitude. She had always preferred the open road, the predictable rumble of her bike, the stark silence of her own small cabin. This house, filled with the echoes of a life she hadn't shared, felt both alien and strangely comforting. It was a repository of love, a testament to the quiet strength of women like Rose, women who built lives with threads Martha had never learned to weave. As dawn approached, a pale, anemic light seeping through the frosted windows, Martha rose, her body stiff and aching, but her mind sharpened by the sleepless night. The immediate crisis of Ethan's medication was averted, but 100 new ones now loomed. Food, clothes, a doctor, social services. The thought of them sent a familiar jolt of defiance through her. She wouldn't let them take Ethan. Not now. Not after Michael's trust, after Rose's silent vigil. She moved through the quiet house, the floorboards groaning softly under her weight, a stark contrast to the thunderous roar of her bike. She found the kitchen, a space now imbued with the memory of their first precarious moments together. The refrigerator hummed, a low, steady drone. She opened it, revealing a sparse but organized collection of groceries, milk, eggs, some fruit, leftovers in neatly labeled containers. Rose, even in her last days, had maintained order, a quiet testament to her resilience. Martha, used to quick stops at roadside diners, felt a pang of unfamiliarity. How long had it been since she'd cooked a proper meal? She started a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, a small comfort in the vast uncertainty. As the coffee brewed, she began to explore the kitchen drawers and cabinets, searching for anything that might reveal more about Rose's life, about Ethan's routine. She found a small, worn recipe box, filled with handwritten cards, some faded with age, others remarkably fresh. Each card was a tiny window into Rose's world, a world of home-cooked meals and family gatherings, a stark contrast to Martha's own solitary existence of canned beans and instant coffee. Her gaze fell on a small calendar tacked to the refrigerator door. Dates were circled, appointments noted in a neat looping script. Dr. Peterson, Ethan checkup, was marked for next week. A wave of dread washed over her. A doctor. Questions. Explanations. Martha had spent decades avoiding official scrutiny, living off the grid. her life a carefully constructed fortress against intrusion. Now she would have to step into the light, expose herself to a system she instinctively mistrusted, all for Ethan. She opened the cabinet above, the sink, her fingers brushing against a stack of chipped ceramic plates. Beneath them, tucked away, she found a small metal box, locked. Her biker instincts, honed by years of navigating dangerous situations, immediately flared. This wasn't just a place for trinkets. This was a place for secrets. She remembered the small embroidered pincushion in Rose's bedroom, the one that had concealed the key to the medicine cabinet. A hunch, a flicker of intuition, guided her back to Rose's room. The room still held the faint, sweet scent of lavender and old paper. Martha went directly to the vanity table, her eyes scanning the familiar objects. The pincushion sat innocently, a small, vibrant splash of color on the polished wood. Her fingers delved into the soft fabric, searching, and there it was, a tiny, intricately shaped key, cold and metallic against her skin. A small smile, a rare, almost imperceptible upturn of her lips, touched her face. Rose, it seemed, had anticipated everything. Back in the kitchen, Martha inserted the key into the lock of the metal box. With a soft click, it sprang open. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of neatly organized documents, were more papers, a small bundle of cash, and a worn leather-bound journal. The documents confirmed her suspicions. Medical records for Ethan, detailing his congenital heart condition, the severity of it, the necessary medications, the specialists. There were also meticulously kept financial records, utility bills, and insurance papers, all in Rose's name. It was a testament to Rose's foresight, her quiet strength, her unwavering commitment to Ethan's well-being. The journal, however, was what truly caught Martha's eye. Its cover was smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. She opened it, her gaze falling on Rose's elegant handwriting. The first entries were mundane, daily observations, but as Martha flipped through the pages, her heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. Rose had chronicled Ethan's life, his milestones, his struggles, his sweet innocence. The journal, its cover smooth and cool beneath her fingertips, felt heavier than its pages suggested, weighted by unspoken stories and profound truths. Martha opened it, her gaze falling on Rose's elegant handwriting, a neat, flowing script that seemed to carry a quiet strength. The first entries were mundane, daily observations, chronicling the weather, a trip to the grocery store, a small repair around the house. But as Martha flipped through the pages, her heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs, anticipating the deeper revelations she knew were coming. Rose had indeed chronicled Ethan's life, his milestones, his struggles, his sweet innocence. Martha read of his first wobbly steps, his infectious giggle when chasing a butterfly in their small backyard, the way he would hum tunelessly while drawing. Each anecdote, each tender observation, painted a vivid picture of a childhood filled with quiet, love and unwavering care, a stark contrast to Martha's own fragmented memories of Michael's early years, shadowed by her restless spirit and the call of the open road. Rose wrote of Ethan's congenital heart condition, the fear that gripped her with every specialist appointment, every lab result, every slight change in his breathing. There were entries detailing the medications, the careful monitoring, the sleepless nights spent listening to his fragile breath. Martha felt a vicarious ache, a deep empathy for the burden Rose had carried, a burden she was now inexplicably inheriting. Then the entries shifted, becoming more reflective, more personal. Rose wrote of Michael, her beloved son-in-law, and the profound grief that had settled over her after his passing. She spoke of his kindness, his gentle spirit, and his unwavering devotion to Ethan. And then, the words that Martha had both dreaded and yearned for appeared, stark and raw on the page. Rose wrote of Michael's enduring pain, over his estrangement from Martha. He never stopped loving his mother, Rose had penned, the ink slightly smudged, as if a tear had fallen there. He carried her absence like a wound, always hoping she'd find her way back. He used to tell Ethan stories about her fierce spirit, her courage. He wanted Ethan to know who she was, even if she wasn't there. Martha's breath hitched. Michael had spoken of her. To Ethan, the woman who had abandoned him, who had chosen the rumble of an engine, over the quiet beat of his heart. The guilt, A familiar crushing weight intensified, but it was interwoven now with a thread of something else, something fragile and unexpected, a glimmer of understanding, a fragile testament to Michael's boundless capacity for forgiveness. He hadn't hated her. He had loved her through it all and had kept her memory alive for his son. Rose's entries continued, detailing Michael's meticulous planning for Ethan's future. He had confided in Rose about his heart condition, a secret burden he carried, knowing his time might be cut short. He had spoken of his deep desire for Martha to eventually connect with Ethan, to be the grandmother he knew she could be, if only she allowed herself. He wanted her to have a second chance, Rose wrote, a chance to mend what was broken, to find redemption in the love of her grandson. He truly believed she would come. He told me he kept her name as the emergency contact, a silent plea, a beacon for her to follow. The words were a hammer blow, each sentence echoing Michael's voice in Martha's mind, a voice she hadn't heard in decades, a voice now forever silenced. He had believed in her. He had trusted her. Even after all she had done, all she had failed to do, he had held on to hope, a hope she had unknowingly, tragically extinguished with her own stubborn pride and fear. A hot, stinging sensation pricked at her eyes, and a tear, unshed for decades, finally broke free, tracing a burning path down her weathered cheek. It was a tear for Michael, for the lost years, for the love she had denied, and for the incredible, terrifying burden of his unwavering faith. Rose's later entries grew more somber, reflecting her own failing health. She wrote of her growing weakness, her fear of leaving Ethan alone, her prayers that Martha would indeed find her way back before it was too late. There was a poignant entry, dated just a few weeks ago. I feel my time drawing near. Ethan is so brave, so resilient. I pray Martha finds this journal. I pray she understands she is his last hope. She must protect him, cherish him, give him the home and family he deserves. Michael trusted her. I trust her. May God guide her heart. Martha's hands trembled, the journal pages blurring through the sudden hot haze in her eyes. The weight of it all, the cumulative impact of Michael's unwavering love, Rose's quiet strength, and Ethan's innocent vulnerability pressed down on her, stealing her breath. This wasn't just about duty anymore, not just about honoring Michael's last wish. This was about something deeper, something profoundly transformative. Rose's words, Michael's faith, they had cracked open the formidable fortress Martha had built around her heart, exposing the raw, aching vulnerability beneath. The biting wind still howled faintly outside, a distant memory of the cold that had once defined her. But inside, Martha felt a different kind of warmth, a burning ember of purpose, igniting within her. The ghosts of her past, the decades of regret, they were still there, but they no longer felt like chains. Instead, they felt like lessons, forging a new path forward. She looked at the neatly stacked documents, the medical records detailing Ethan's fragile heart, the appointment for Dr. Peterson next week, the looming threat of social services. These challenges, once daunting, now seemed like obstacles she was prepared to face, not alone, but with the quiet strength of Rose's legacy and the enduring love of Michael as her guides. This wasn't just Michael's son, her grandson. This was their son, a living testament to a love that transcended mistakes, a fragile, precious life that depended entirely on her. The road ahead was unknown, fraught with the ghosts of her own making, but for the first time in decades, Martha felt a flicker of something beyond regret, the fragile, terrifying, exhilarating spark of a love she had denied, a family she had lost, and a future she was now fiercely determined to build. She would not let them down. She would not let Ethan down. She would find her way back. We're at a pivotal moment. Martha has just uncovered profound truths that have shattered her hardened exterior and ignited a fierce sense of purpose. What do you think Martha's immediate next step should be? How will she channel this newfound resolve into action for Ethan? Let me know your thoughts. I'm excited to see where this journey takes us. Theo. Biting wind, a cruel, invisible hand, still clawed at the edges of Martha's consciousness, but its icy grip no longer held her captive. A different kind of chill had settled deep in her bones, a lingering echo of the night's desolate discovery, Yet it was tempered by a warmth that spread slow and unfamiliar through her chest. The small, crumpled birth certificate, the worn legal documents, and the precious, creased letter from Michael lay nestled in her jacket pocket, physical anchors to a past she had denied, and a future she was now inexplicably ready to embrace. She knelt, her knees protesting against the frozen pavement, and gently took Ethan's small, cold hand in hers. His fingers were like twigs, fragile and almost translucent in the dim light. "Come on, kid," she rasped, her voice still rough but now infused with a tentative, unfamiliar tenderness. "Let's get you somewhere warm." Ethan hesitated, his wide, dark eyes, so uncannily like Michael's, searching hers. The distrust was still there, a faint shadow in their depths, but beneath it a desperate weariness, a longing for safety, flickered. He nodded slowly, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and allowed her to guide him. Her old Harley, a beast of chrome and steel, usually a symbol of her fierce independence, now felt like a chariot of responsibility. She helped him onto the back, carefully securing his small frame against her, the unfamiliar weight a startling comfort. The roar of the engine, usually a solitary symphony, now hummed with a new protective rhythm as they pulled away from the overflowing dumpster, leaving the ghosts of that desolate Christmas Eve street behind. Martha's cabin was a stark, solitary sentinel on the edge of the woods, a place where she had retreated from the world, where the only warmth had come from a crackling fire and the burn of whiskey. But tonight, it felt different. She led Ethan inside, the scent of pine and stale wood smoke filling the air. He stood awkwardly by the door, clutching his threadbare coat, his gaze darting around the sparsely furnished room, the worn leather armchair, the stack of old motorcycle magazines, the single, unadorned Christmas tree in the corner, a half-hearted attempt at seasonal cheer. "Sit by the fire," Martha instructed, her voice softer than she'd intended. She stoked the dying embers, coaxing them back to life until a cheerful blaze danced in the hearth. She rummaged through her meager pantry, finding a can of chicken noodle soup and some crackers. As the soup simmered on the stovetop, its steam rising like a fragile promise, Martha watched Ethan. He was curled in the armchair, small and vulnerable, the firelight casting dancing shadows on his face. He looked so small, so utterly alone, and a fresh wave of grief, sharp and potent, washed over her for Michael, for the years they had lost, for the son who had carried such a heavy burden of love and forgiveness. Later, as Ethan fed and finally, warm, drifted off to sleep on the old couch, wrapped in a faded quilt Martha had found in a dusty trunk, she sat by the fire, the journal open on her lap. Rose's words, Michael's faith, they echoed in the quiet cabin, weaving a tapestry of love and sacrifice. She thought of the unopened Christmas card, still tucked away in her jacket. With trembling fingers, she retrieved it. 7 years. 7 years of fear, of pride, of regret. She tore open the envelope, the crisp paper a stark contrast to the worn journal pages. Inside, a simple card depicting a snow-covered village and Michael's familiar sprawling handwriting. "Mom, just wanted to say Merry Christmas. I know things have been complicated, but I never stop thinking about you. There's always a place for you, always, and there's someone I really want you to meet someday. He's got your eyes, kinda. Hope you're doing okay. Love, Michael." A fresh wave of tears, hot and cleansing, streamed down Martha's face. "He's got your eyes." Kinda. Michael had known. He had hoped. He had loved her unequivocally despite everything. The card wasn't just a message from the past, it was a bridge, extending across the chasm of their estrangement, a silent plea for connection that she had, in her fear, ignored. The guilt was still there, a heavy stone, but now it was accompanied by a fierce determination. She would honor his trust. She would honor his love. The first few days were a blur of quiet adjustments. Martha, a woman of rough edges and solitary habits, found herself navigating the unfamiliar terrain of caring for a child. She learned to make toast without burning it, to listen patiently to Ethan's soft-spoken observations, to recognize the subtle signs of his fatigue. His small, frail heart was a constant presence, a silent ticking clock that underscored the urgency of their situation. The medical records detailing his congenital condition became her new scripture, pored over with a meticulousness she usually reserved for motorcycle manuals. She called Dr. Peterson's office, her voice surprisingly steady as she explained the situation, the weight of Rose's journal entries and Michael's legal documents lending her an unexpected authority. An emergency appointment was scheduled for early the following week. Social services remained a looming threat, a bureaucratic monster she knew she would have to face. But now, armed with Michael's carefully prepared custody papers and Rose's heartfelt plea, she felt a quiet resolve hardening within her. She wouldn't just fight for Ethan. She would fight with him, for a future where he was safe, loved, and whole. One afternoon, as a gentle snow fell outside, blanketing the woods in pristine white, Ethan found Martha in her small workshop, meticulously cleaning her bike. He watched her for a long time, his gaze fixed on the gleaming chrome, the powerful engine. "Papa had a bike," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not as big as yours, but he loved it." Martha paused, her rag still. "He did," she murmured, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "He loved the open road." Ethan walked closer, his small fingers tracing the cold metal of the exhaust pipe. "He said you were a legend, the best rider he ever knew." Martha swallowed. The words a balm to a wound she hadn't realized was still festering. Michael had spoken of her. He had remembered. "He was a good man, your papa," she said, her voice thick with unshed emotion. "He was kind." Ethan looked up at her, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not distrust, but curiosity, and perhaps a nascent connection. "He said you just needed to find your way back," he echoed. Michael's words, now his own. Martha knelt, her eyes level with his. "He was right," she said, her voice raw. "He was always right." She reached out, her calloused hand gently touching his cheek. His skin was soft, warm. It was a small gesture, but for Martha, it was a seismic shift, a breaking of decades of self-imposed emotional exile. The cabin, once a fortress of solitude, slowly began to transform. Ethan's small drawings, vibrant with crayon colors, appeared on the refrigerator door. A worn teddy bear, found in a box of old keepsakes, sat on the mantelpiece. Martha, who had never cooked more than a basic meal, found herself poring over cookbooks, trying to tempt Ethan's fragile appetite. Her evenings, once spent in quiet contemplation or the numbing haze of a bottle, were now filled with the soft rustle of storybooks and the hushed rhythm of a child's breathing. The road ahead was not without its challenges. There would be doctor's appointments, difficult conversations with social workers, and the daunting task of navigating a world she had deliberately abandoned. But Martha no longer felt alone. Rose's journal, Michael's letter, Ethan's quiet presence, they were her compass, her anchors, guiding her through the uncharted waters of this new life. She had found her way back, not to her place, but to a purpose, to a love that transcended mistakes, a family forged in loss and redeemed by hope. The biting wind still howled sometimes, a memory of the cold, but inside, Martha held a quiet, burning ember, a fierce, protective love that promised to keep the darkness at bay. She was Martha Morrison, the rider, the legend, but now she was also something more profound, something she had never dared to dream of. She was a grandmother, and she was home. Thank you for joining us on Martha's powerful journey of redemption and discovery. Her story reminds us that it's never too late to find our way back to what truly matters, to mend what's broken, and to embrace the unexpected paths life sets before us. If you were moved by Martha's transformation and Ethan's resilient spirit, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depths of the human heart. Join our community of storytellers and dreamers, and share your own tales of courage, connection, and second chances. Your stories inspire us all. The biting wind, a cruel, invisible hand, still clawed at the edges of Martha's consciousness, but its icy grip no longer held her captive. A different kind of chill had settled deep in her bones, a lingering echo of the night's desolate discovery. Yet it was tempered by a warmth that spread slow and unfamiliar through her chest.